Welcome back to Aether Hour, everybody. I'm your host, Conrad Franz, joined as always by Dimitri Kaligan and a returning guest, possibly our most frequent returning guest, Anthony Westgate, good friend of the show, host of the Reversion podcast, which is, of course, the legendary home of the infamous episode 1, Space is Fake, where Anthony and I discussed that very fascinating and relevant topic about cosmology. But we are here today to discuss Epstein, the Epstein files, some of the more esoteric aspects of it. Anthony has been diving deep into the files, exploring some of the more esoteric, transhumanist, and even Jewish mystic connections and realities of our elite criminal overlords that have now been brought to light in the midst of this amazing, incredible pulling back of the veil, all as World War III is going on. Of course, this is being brought to you, what are we, 6 days into World War with Iran right now, the Purim War, as I'm calling it. So all sorts of things are going on. Many are calling it, Trump. I wouldn't say it was necessarily the number one factor, but I would say it was undoubtedly a motivating factor for Trump going to war, that he was sick of everyone talking about all of this Epstein nonsense. So we're going to be talking about the realities of that. We're going to be talking about Les Wexner, kabbalistic demons, nuclear fusion, all sorts of really fascinating and interesting connections with this enigmatic character, the big Steen himself. So we're going to be getting into all of this and so much more. So before I ask Anthony to tell us how he's been doing, Dimitri, how are you?
Yeah, doing great, Conrad. Of course, here for the special, the big episode 109. So very excited to discuss further noticing with our good friend Anthony. It should be a good episode.
No, 109, I would wager, that's an important number. And if we want to make it 110, then I think if people were aware of the things that go on in these types of emails, then that might be more of a possibility. But putting all those numerological memes aside, Anthony, how are you doing? It's good to have you back on Aether Hour. I think this is your first appearance on the show in 2026. So thanks for coming back. What have you been working on? Feel free to tell the audience what has been going on in the world of the Reversion.
Yeah, doing great. Thanks, brothers, again for having me on. The Reversion's been going well. We're live streaming now over on YouTube, doing some live deep dives, covering the subjects that I normally cover on Substack, but just into more casual studies, I guess, live explorations and whatnot. And still working on writing this book about the kabbalistic influence of the Protestant Revolution. So that's coming along. I think I'm about a third done at this point, but who knows? And just took a little bit of a break from that stuff to do this deep dive into the Epstein files, which we're going to be discussing here, and found some really interesting things that I hadn't seen being largely discussed. So I'm excited to get into that. There was actually one priest that does content on YouTube. I don't think I'll mention his name, but it doesn't really matter. But he had a viral video going around discouraging Orthodox Christians from looking at the Epstein files due to how evil they are, which is true. It's very dark and evil stuff that is revealed in these documents. And to his point, it's not good to be really inundated in this stuff. Not everyone can kind of handle what is behind the curtain, so to speak, in the Epstein files. And it could really take you down some really dark rabbit holes. So to that degree, it's true. But I do think that it's important to know what the controllers of our world are up to, like what kind of things that they were involved in, what their beliefs were, what motivated these evil things that they were doing. I mean, with Epstein, it's kind of the conventional thing that he was just, this really powerful elite that was running a global pedo ring. It's like, that's what everyone knows about him. But when we look what else was going on, there was much more to it. He had connections with extremely powerful figures. I see the Epstein files as a door that was opened into the personal exchanges among these extremely powerful figures that probably for the first time in human history, we've gotten a real candid view into. Even among all the redactions, like we're actually able now to see what their conversations and correspondences were like. There were things that they acknowledged, even in certain threads, that they kind of like acknowledged that they shouldn't be mentioning certain things. So there was even within that a lot of secrets that we may never know. But so I do think that there is some degree of importance to know what was going on here for sure. So that's kind of what motivated my research. And I was very careful to parse through a lot of this stuff and make sure that I had the context right and reading the threads in full instead of, doing the thing that you see on Twitter where it's just like someone's posting a single email, highlighting it and looking at these key terms and stuff and saying like, oh, see, there's that word. That word came up. So whatever. It's like, that doesn't really give us much context. So I was doing a lot of the reading of these conversations to just make sure that I was getting my stuff right. So
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, a lot of people are, again, they're just control F and they're searching. And I mean, remember the whole thing about the Ball bank account, which was literally just a like copy error in the filing, of course. There's been images of Epstein with children that, again, not that anyone would want their children to be around Jeffrey Epstein, but that are ostensibly innocuous of him being with family friends, his godchildren, all these sorts of things, children sitting on the laps of adults who are their own parents, these sorts of things that are just really serve no other purpose than to discredit the conspiracy researchers that are exposing a lot of really serious stuff like connections with the Israeli government and the obvious evidence that Epstein was a Mossad and Israeli intelligence operative. I mean, and of course, I've discussed these on the streams. We have the bionic penis, goyim in abundance. Again, some of this other nuclear fusion related stuff that's less humorous and more just frightening with how well connected this character was with the highest echelons of power and the most relevant technologies that could be, weaponized and whatnot. So I guess before I ask maybe a few specifics that I have, Anthony, where would you want to start? Like what specific story, if you were trying to talk to somebody about the relevance of this content as far as understanding who really controls our world, where would you direct them first?
well, kind of I would say like conspiracy 101 stuff that Epstein was involved with was in regards to his financial connections. So, he was a member of the usual global banking elite cabals. So the Council of Foreign Relations, he was getting invited to the Bilderberg Group. There was discussions about, at least in one of the Ghislaine Maxwell emails, that they were going to be attending the Bilderberg meeting. I would assume if she was going, so was Jeffrey. And then Jeff himself openly talked about almost like bragging that he was a member of the Trilateral Commission, which is founded by David Rockefeller. He had connections to Rockefeller as well. And so I'd probably start there because you could literally just pull up a video of him talking about this. I think in his most recent interview that we have, where he's on video disclosing this stuff. I mean, he put the Trilateral Commission and the Council of Foreign Relations on his resume. So like that was no secret. That doesn't really require much conspiratorial thinking. And then that kind of, I think, would be a starting point to the deeper stuff, because anyone who's got any level of like familiarity or initiation into the conspiracy world, those things tend to be a red flag into that there was more going on. There was other involvement with figures that were involved in the globalist project, if you will. So that I think would be the starting point, and then I would go into kind of the way I structured the article I wrote. So it starts with that because that's, again, an admission that you can find from him on video. And then there was some email exchanges that involved membership into certain secret societies, one of which I never heard of. I never heard anybody talk about. I don't think that we knew this secret society in particular even existed. I mean, it was called the Zodiac Club, which was founded about 100 years ago by members of the banking cabal that established the Federal Reserve. They were in the Jekyll Island event, and one was from J.P. Morgan. I think J.P. Morgan himself was in it. So, there's just some really crucial figures that were connected with the initial Zodiac Club. The Zodiac Club was a secret society that consisted of 12 members. Each of them represented a sign of the zodiac. And I don't know if they were their actual zodiac signs or if it was symbolic, but I was able to find a book that was published in the early founding of the Zodiac Club that was kind of like their doctrines and creeds, and it had a record of the membership. So that's how we're able to confirm who exactly was in the initial founding. And the way that it worked was there was only 12 seats, and the seats weren't occupied until one of the members died. So we know that Epstein was at the very least involved. I wasn't able to confirm he was an actual member, but there was discussions in emails that were acknowledging that he was aware of what it was, and they were discussing potential members, like who was, better suited to be a member of the Zodiac. So that to me would indicate that he had some kind of involvement in it if he was being emailed in an inquiry about who should become a member. And so, I don't know enough about this secret society to know exactly how nefarious they were, but because it seemed, on paper, it comes off as like, oh, they were just a dinner club. They had these elite dinners and would go out to these expensive restaurants and have their private meetings whenever they were gathering, I guess. But it says that in the documents too, that it was a dinner club or whatever. But, we know how these secret societies work. Like, oh, the Masons are just a fraternity. It's just whatever. It's like, there's always something else going on there. But, the Zodiac itself is very esoteric, obviously. So, I don't know if you want to go into the other things, the other secret societies, but there were a few. I think that was one of the more notable ones. The other was the Circle of the Inter-Alliance, which was Paris elite club. That was, this seemed to be some kind of inner circle that had these very blatantly Enlightenment principles in the founding documents. And, the act of their creation was the founding of this, quote, international spirit. So another kind of overtly globalist project with very powerful figures there as well. He had an email correspondence with the France Warner Brothers executive, or his daughter, rather, Caroline Lang, who was a member, or I think at least her father was, Jack Lang. He was an Epstein co-conspirator. I think Jean-Luc Brunel was a member, and he was basically the French Jeffrey Epstein. When Epstein got arrested and was under investigation, he kind of fled the French police, and they ended up catching him. And he also, quote, hung himself in his French prison cell in 2022 after being charged with pedophilia. So, yeah, he was a member as well, it seems. So, again, I don't know exactly what, because we didn't know that these societies existed, but we know that he was a member of various secret societies. I don't know what exactly went on in these secret societies, but there's also discussions about one of his correspondences was going to check out what goes on at Bohemian Grove. Yeah, he was like, oh, I'm going to go see what's going on. They were interested in some Bohemian Grove documentary, and the guy was trying to get firsthand experience. I don't know if that means Epstein went, but, they had, like, the interesting thing about Epstein was, like, he had knowledge of conspiracy stuff. Like, he had knowledge of conspiratorial dialogues, and one of the later email correspondences with Deepak Chopra, who he was very close with, he seemed to be really interested in a documentary that was being made about remote viewing, which you can actually view on YouTube for free. It's since been published and released, and you can watch it on YouTube. It's probably what you would expect, but he was very interested in technology and transhumanism and hypnosis and mind control and tantric sexual practices. So, I'm sure we'll get into that and why he was interested in this stuff. But yeah, he had, a very deep interest in the occult. His text exchanges with Steve Bannon are very interesting. That'll be another discussion we can have here, because he got into some of that with Steve Bannon.
Absolutely. I found, obviously, the first thing that comes up in the article, and this is probably the most spoken about, because in some capacity, it's not even a secret society, really. It's so, at least maybe it was 20 years ago, but at this point, after the InfoWars, after the work of so many conspirologists or people behind the scenes who've uncovered this, similar to Bohemian Grove, which was somewhat normalized, now we kind of see the veneration of a huge and the worship of a huge Moloch statue on the west coast of America as somewhat being the norm in American culture among the elites. But that is about as strange as it gets. And yes, of course, it becomes even stranger as you dwell into all these other organizations. And of course, one of which is the Trilateral Commission, which turns out, and Alex Jones himself kind of emphasizes this, that Jeffrey Epstein was some sort of, perhaps if not chairman, but heavily participating in the works of the Trilateral Commission, at least in the 2000s. And that was quite surprising because the Trilateral Commission is an actual, basically, or based on Council of Foreign Relations, it is a proper foreign policy roundtable networking organization, which was created by huge figures in, I suppose, the conspirological world of 20th century Cold War America. David Rockefeller, you mentioned, and Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Brzezinski specifically, I mean, just even the year of its creation, right, 1973, like one of the key 6 years before the Iranian Revolution. And obviously, Brzezinski is directly related to the Iranian Revolution because he was, of course, the advisor during the Carter administration when the Iranian Revolution took place. That was his main time in office. So, in fact, Brzezinski's entire thesis on foreign policy was heavily influenced by those events that took place in the late 1970s when America, in a way, perhaps partially lost control over Iran, at least that particular dominance. But I've noticed if Epstein himself, this seemingly partially uneducated, without any proper lineage, no real money behind them except for those, suspicious donations he received from, again, wealthy Talmudic oligarchs in America, it appears that he was, for some reason, hoisted amongst these top families, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and even people like he sat on this massive council, this discussing foreign policy with figures who probably he didn't even deserve to speak to in a way. Like the man doesn't seem to have been qualified for it, and yet he does appear to discuss, foreign policy, the future of the world with top people of American finance. And it is, I think, incredibly suspicious just to begin with. Naturally, everything kind of connects together. Obviously, you have the Bilderberg group as well, which is referenced several times. And perhaps Jeffrey Epstein himself maybe even attended certain Bilderberg conferences throughout the 2000s. Again, not every list of every Bilderberg group conference is made public. I know some in the past have been. Alex Jones on InfoWars has disclosed them. But it is quite curious that, Epstein was involved with the Trilateral Commission. This was a strongly anti-Russian created. I mean, it was created to solidify the idea that America should win during the Cold War. Obviously, America and its greatest ally, Israel, and Israel dominating the Middle East, and Soviet influence should be reduced. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, as one of the key creators of the Trilateral Commission, let's keep in mind, what did he say? I believe it was in 1989 or just around the time the Soviet Union fell apart. He says, well, after communism is defeated, America will basically have one primary enemy in Eastern Europe, and that is the Eastern Orthodox Church. And this is Brzezinski, somebody who allegedly, according to his early life, is a Polish nobleman from the Polish Szlachta, and his father happened to be a Philo-Semite Polak who assisted Jews to escape the Holocaust during the Second World War. But, Polish nobility, some people could have been members of the tribe in the past, and then they, assimilated. In any case, Epstein directly related to these big figureheads and like foreign policy elite circles. I mean, in a way, Anthony, just wanted to give you a commentary. It does appear that he's literally among these mainstream conspirological organizations and he's directly involved with them. It does appear that he has some sort of expertise. Now, where he obtained that or why he was important, this guy who isn't even a citizen of Israel, Jeffrey Epstein, it appears, was just this American Jewish boy from the east coast of America. And yet he's thrown in with the Rockefellers, with the Rothschilds, with people with big, foreign policy, geopolitical heads like Zbigniew Brzezinski and his legacy. And he's given all this authority. It's probably the most surprising figure that we've learned of because he seemingly has no real standing in terms of hereditary descendants or any sort of capital to speak of. It's just, he's apparently just a very talented man. So just wondered what your thoughts were about, all these big names like the Council on Foreign Relations in the article you mentioned, Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberg Group just coming up again, bringing all the old conspiracy heads back into it because it's like these names were somewhat forgotten amidst the great noticing which we're experiencing today. The noticing has kind of covered all the bases, but look, these organizations still matter. These are basically the neo-Illuminati circles. And Epstein was literally, it seems like, on the round table for almost all of them.
Thank you all so much for listening to the free preview of this incredible Aether Hour episode. It's always good to have Anthony Westgate on with us, so be sure to check out all of his links down in the description below. But if you get behind the paywall and support this show and become a true World War Now patriot that, keeps the lights on here at the proverbial World War Now bunker, you will also hear us discussing Epstein's connection to the Islamic world, some of the deeper kabbalistic demon connections that he has, Les Wexner's personal kabbalistic demon, the golem, weird homunculi thing that potentially was being constructed and built by Epstein and his associates. Epstein, allegedly, at least by his own admission, destroying any potential for nuclear fusion to be developed, cold fusion, so standing in the way of potential free energy. We talk about his comments on Iran and his connections with Israel, and his remarks about how Trump would start a war with Iran if he found himself cornered like a rat. So get behind the paywall and hear all of this in-depth analysis on the Epstein files and everything else going on. And with all of that, we will see you on the other side. God bless.